Alrighty then. Okay, so this is part two of the March on paper postmortem. We'll be going over objectives and key metrics next. So first of all, starting again with those positives, the objective chart here utilizes objective priority. What that basically means is there's a larger objective that minor objectives feed into. This is strong when you want to build up on a theme or if you want to focus on showing how the objectives are related. Another good thing is that these objectives each establish connection with their key metrics. Part of the rubric for objectives does say that they need to be referenced throughout the campaign, and we'll go over how having these units for these goals touches into those key metrics in a little bit. We should have included a measurable statistic here in the awareness, and also it might have been useful to talk about timelines and the objectives for the campaign. Additionally, this may have benefited from having an analysis paragraph as to why each of these objectives were chosen. That does show up in the description, so it's not as pressing as some other papers, but it's worth noting. Before we move on to key objectives, however, I wanted to go over our key metrics. Before I wanted to do that, I wanted to talk about what makes a good objective. First of all, this is not a good objective. These two are, and we're going to alternate between them. First thing you need to look at is an action word. In that case, it's going to be increase for both of them. It could be increase, it could be raise, it could be lower. It's just something that shows a change in direction. Then we're going to give them the overall idea of the objective. You're going to be very careful with how you choose to phrase these because that way it'll be easier to link them up later on in the key metrics. In this case, we have engagement and sales. Specify that. Digital engagement, total sales. Next, you're going to have to show them where you're doing this or how you're doing this, kind of. So that's increasing it in digital engagement across all platforms or total sales of all product lanes. Give them a measurement by 30%, by 70%. And then this last part is not necessary. It's not completely functional even, but it does lend credibility to your paper, and that is comparing it against a benchmark. It could be something specific, like specific months that it shows, or it could be a little bit more vague over the previous financial quarter. This benchmark should be adapted depending on what objective you're looking at. Something talking about sales, it makes more sense to phrase it as the previous financial quarter. Something talking about engagement makes sense to look at a benchmark for the same time period for the previous year. For the objective section, I did get an 8 out of an 8. I would give myself a 7 out of 8. The alignment of all of the objectives together covers a wide scope. There's not much overlap in the sort of key metrics that would feed into each objective, which would make them feel repetitive. And additionally, each of the 3 minor objectives all play well into the ultimate objective. However, 2 things that really should have changed, the awareness objective did not establish a metric, something specific like that 70% or 30%. And then the ultimate goal should have had a benchmark. It's not as vital because it's the ultimate goal, and as a result, it covers the entire campaign. It's meant to be doing something new. It's meant to be braving new boundaries, and as a result, it may not be comparable to the past. If possible, though, you should. And then to avoid next time, leaving out a paragraph analysis as to why those objectives were chosen can be a double-edged sword. In my case, I didn't need it because I referenced my objectives throughout the campaign, throughout the paper. A paper, however, that chooses to not follow such a formulaic approach may need that analysis so a judge understands why they chose those. Moving into key metrics, this is going to cover a couple pages. This project was all about corporate responsibility and accountability, talking about transparency and sustainable operations. As a result, having a transparency schedule is kind of a given. It's unique, but it also fits the vibe of the paper. This helps with overall professionalism, with the theme, even with originality. The key metrics, however, is split across 2 pages in the paper, which makes it feel unprofessional. Additionally, there's a contingency fund of 15,000, which by the way, every paper should have a contingency fund. I don't care what you were doing, it needs a contingency fund. And this should have been labeled. It's a little bit unclear what this is. This is a transparency schedule. All right, so here is our key metrics grid. If I had to redo this, I would do this in row format so that it is less visually overstimulating. I personally use a formulatic approach when I am writing key metrics, and I get full points on them every time, but they can read as unapproachable. So generally what you'll do is you'll have one very formulatic grid, slightly less formulatic, and as you go, it gets less and less formulatic so that as the judge trails off, they aren't stuck reading the same amount of detail on every single one. My donations and merch is the ultimate goal, but I can get away with having the least information because that's the one that is built up over and over again throughout the whole paper. So let's actually look at feedback and data mining, and let's understand what that formula is that I used here. First and foremost, the actual title here for this, feedback and data mining, is meant to summarize the general collective of objectives and key metrics you'll see within it. Then we're going to restate our objective as clearly as we can. We seek a more positive, sustainable public perception. It's clean, it's to the point, it can even almost fully restate what your objective slide said, but you're going to take out the measurements, just getting the cold hard basics. Next, we're going to tell them when we collect our key metric, before, during, and after. Next, we're going to tell them what our actual first key metric collection is. That's customer feedback. Then we tell them why. Why do we care? Because this is measuring our social ROI, which is feeding into our objective. Because we're looking for a more positive public perception, we need to know how we're doing. Customer feedback is a little bit vague, so we're going to narrow it down. That's surveys, data mining, and focus groups. If you want, you can get even more specific and give another example. Opt-in, end of campaign, feedback surveys. Once again, we're telling us why. Why do we care? Why are we using these? Because these allow for a broad range of answers, which means that success and opinions can be gauged. In the objectives, we looked at the specific benchmark. For the key metrics, you can sort of bring that back. You've already told them when your benchmark is, so now you're going to apply a statistic or something measurable to see the actual impact. So in comparison to the original 26%, we seek to see 80%, and then you're going to tell them, what are you looking for? That's the benchmark. What about the benchmark are you actually comparing? All polled customers believe you will achieve your sustainability goal by the promised 2040 deadline. It's a very, very formulatic way of approaching it. At the very end, just in case they miss the objective, you're going to club them over the head with it, and you're going to say, this ties into this objective. It's the easiest way to make sure you get the referenced objective point. So, overall key metrics. I got an 8 out of 8. I would give myself a 6 out of 8. I feel like the effort is really evident. That's a lot of what the feedback I got from my judges were, that the key metrics tie in well together. However, this is my opinion, I felt like the paragraphs, especially for the key metric area, are so overwhelming in length. Even if I just reformatted some graphics, if I stretched them out, if I made them rows instead of cubes, it probably would have been easier to read. Additionally, kind of tying back into that, splitting pages and using ill-fitting graphics just makes your paper look cheap and cheapens the usage for your judge. I think overall, the key metric formula, once I figured it out, definitely helped me. I haven't seen any other papers do it. It took me a lot of research to develop that little thing. It is sort of tying back into more of a corporate speak. So you want to make sure that you're not using too much jargon. However, overall, The key metrics and the objectives have to work well together, or else both points will suffer as a result. All right, so that was part two. The next part, I believe we're looking at the budget. So that will be up in a minute.